So with that being said, I have a couple prelim fights that I wanted to go over. The first of which being the fight between Josh Quinlan and Trey Waters. I found this particularly interesting because Josh Quinlan is a guy who goes out there and he knocks people out. He doesn't have a ton of MMA experience, notated by his 6-0 record, and also some of the guys that he has beaten were, not of the biggest caliber. LFA 0-0-0, 6-3, 3-1. He came back, got a knockout over Logan Urban, and then pissed very hot. Per USADA had to take a suspension, and that was ruled a no contest. Came back and knocked out Jason Witt fairly recently, 6 months ago, and he's going to be back inside of the UFC. He's only 30 years old, 175 pounds, 6 foot, 72-inch reach. He's going to be taking on Trey Waters, who is a recent UFC signee, 28 years old, 168 pounds. Last time he weighed in, it was a week and 1 day ago at LFA to take a belt, I believe, from Jalen Fuller. So he won a belt there and is going to be coming back to, it's really close when Tapology includes the hours ago that you fought last. So that's pretty interesting there. 6'5", going to be the bigger man with the bigger reach here. Trey Waters, the truth, is going to have a smaller frame. Josh Quinlan, like, again, saying that I think at one point he had either popped hot or was about to pop hot, and his fight fell through. So they moved it over to California instead of Vegas, or Vegas from California. I'm not sure exactly which way it went, but to the less strict commission, was able to fight and get a knockout there. And then, had another instance where fight was overturned to a no contest. So a couple PEDs, USADA issues for Josh Quinlan. The UFC doing what they can to get this guy in there and fighting. This fight is going to take place at 170 pounds. Like I said, 168.8 is what Trey Waters weighed in most recently. Again, him coming in fighting a week ago, I'm going to be a little bit concerned about that. He did get a knockout. He is a stand-up guy. He does have a bit of grappling in his repertoire. And Josh Quinlan is make no mistake about it. He's going to go out there and he's going to look to finish you. He has shown an ability to be patient, but he also, when he sees that his opponent is hurt, being a little bit newer to the sport, he can rush in there and he can go crazy. I think that Trey Waters may be in certain degrees a little bit more skilled in terms of a technique, but Josh Quinlan is going to have a much bigger power advantage here. Trey Waters might be able to bang up the legs of Josh Quinlan, and we haven't seen him go into the second or the third round. So going a little bit later in the fight could be potentially interesting and sway the fight towards Trey Waters. He is just coming off of a training camp. I'm not exactly sure how soon he knew that this might have been on his horizon following that win. So that's always something to think about. He went through a training camp, won a belt in the LFA. You got to figure maybe he would take a week off, and being that his fight was only a week and a handful of days ago, you don't know how that's going to be getting back into the cage, taking such a heavy training load, and then having to go out, fight, any injuries sustained there, turn around and get ready to fight again. But it's the UFC. You make that call when they call you up. So Trey Waters getting the call. I think I'm going to go with Josh Quinlan in this one. I wouldn't be totally surprised if Trey Waters gets it done, especially in the second and the third. But I would say Josh Quinlan, especially being that it's not his UFC debut. He holds a lot more of the power. He has been in the UFC. He's known he has a fight coming up. He had a couple fall through prior to this. So I think Trey Waters is going to be able to step in there. And like we said, typically guys on their UFC debuts, they don't do maybe as well as they would like or we would like them to. So for all those reasons, I'm going with Josh Quinlan, and the votes on Tapology going to back me up here. So I'm going with Josh Quinlan as my first and foremost prelim notable pick. And then moving up, the next fight following that is going to be Cody Durden versus Charles Johnson. Charles Energy Johnson, coming off of a loss to Ode Osborne, the split decision loss, where he went in there and he didn't look great. It was not a good performance of himself. He still went out there and almost got it done. Speaking of guys on short notice, he is just coming off that win, that TKO ground and pound of Jimmy Flick, where Jimmy Flick didn't look all that great. It was Jimmy Flick's first time back in the cage in quite some time. So Charles Johnson went out there, got that done, looked good doing it, turned around maybe a little bit too soon, and had that loss to Ode Osborne. I think he had some complications going into that fight, whether he was sick or he was ill or he had an injury. Regardless, again, only a month ago, so not great from Charles Johnson, but he's going up against Cody Durden, and Charles Johnson's a guy who, you see him in the way he fights. He's predominantly a stand-up fighter, but he has a good ground game, and he's very active off of his back, and he's really good at standing up too. A lot of times he can get taken down, but he stands right back up. And I think that was some of the reason that we were interested in him with the Jimmy Flick fight, is seeing if Jimmy Flick could be able to get him down after all the time off and being able to hold him down. And he wasn't really able to. Cody Durden, he's a grappler by trade. He's started to fall in love with the hands a little bit. He's going to go in there. He's going to try and take you down, especially at 125 pounds. He's going to have the wrestling advantage. But the real question is he going to be able to hold down Charles Johnson throughout the length of the fight? And I'm going to go with no. I think Charles Johnson's going to be able to get up. I think he's going to be able to land some leg kicks, send some teep kicks out to the body, and really hurt the stamina and the endurance of Cody Durden. I think he's then in the second and the third round be able to really start piecing him up. And I think because Charles Johnson is very active traditionally. We're in April here. This will be his third, maybe fourth fight of 2023. So Charles Johnson maintaining active. Looking at Cody Durden, it's the first time fighting in 5 months. He did get that win over Carlos Mata, and he's got the knockout win over JP Bays. Takes the loss to Muhammad Mokaev, in which he was just not able to contend on the ground, and then got submitted by Jimmy Flick being flying arm triangle choke. I think when you look at these two guys' styles on the ground, I think Cody Durden's going to be much more wrestling heavy, and he's going to be able to not necessarily fight off submissions if Charles Johnson goes for them. But again, that's not necessarily Charles Johnson's game. He's going to be a stand-up fighter by trade. So I think if Cody Durden tries to get it down, he may secure some takedowns, especially going later into the fight. Earlier in the fight, he will be able to. I think Cody Durden definitely begins to fade as the time goes on because he comes out there with a really aggressive first round, trying to get somebody to the ground and trying to beat him up down there. I think Johnson is going to be wise to that, be able to stand up, and even if he doesn't, as the fight goes long, he'll be able to start defending some of those takedowns, get up a little bit easier, and then start to land. I don't think Charles Johnson's going to be a guy who, if Cody Durden takes him down a bunch in the first, you're going to see a big fall off in terms of his energy and his stamina. So in this one, I'm going with Charles Johnson. I think he's going to get it done. I think he may even end up finishing Cody Durden because of Cody Durden being tired, especially as the fight goes on. So I would go with Charles Johnson, like a second or a third round knockout, potentially even a decision. And we're going down and we're looking at the votes on Tapology. They're agreeing. They're going with decision for Charles Johnson. So those are my first two picks on the card. And my last one, or something I want to highlight, is going to be Natan Levy taking on Pete Rodriguez. Pete Rodriguez is a guy who has fought all over the weight card. You can see obviously looking different here as he did in his first picture, looking a lot more cut in that first picture. He's 5'9", 73-inch reach. His last weight was at 170 pounds. I believe he's even fought at 185. I could be wrong on that. So he's a guy fought at 175, fought at welterweight here at 170, moving down to 55. He's been a guy who's been moving up and down. Can't totally dial in the weight here. He had a last win over Mike Jackson, and that's not a guy who you're going to really tout a win over. The fact that you're going to be thrown Mike Jackson after the loss to Jack Della Maddalena maybe means that the UFC is looking for you to go in there and do big things. But against Natan Levy, kind of a guy who's been moving up and down the weight class, and Natan Levy, who's a guy who's been kind of a stalwart to a certain extent inside the UFC now for 2.5 months here. Lost his initial debut to Rafa Garcia, but then got the win over Mike Breeden and Genaro Valdez. I think Natan Levy is going to be able to get it done based off of his comfortability in the weight class, overall striking, and especially as the fight goes on, I think he's going to have a little bit better of the gas tank. But it's a hard one to predict, especially with Pete Rodriguez being 26 years old and having that variability. He was able to get some knockouts at a higher weight class. So moving down to 55, it's going to be interesting to see how much power he has there, how much speed he retains there, and most importantly, what his cardio is going to look like. So this one I'm going to stay away from in terms of a bet. But I just thought it was particularly interesting watching Pete Rodriguez fight, previously at 170 pounds or 175, 170, and work his way down to 155. And I believe just his second or third UFC bout here. Very different levels of competition. Jack Della Maddalena got knocked out quite early on. And then obviously Mike Jackson going to knock him out pretty early. It doesn't tell us a lot about him. I think he's going to have a big step up, and I know it's going to be a big step up going from Mike Jackson at 170 to Natan Levy at 155. The speed is going to be different for him, and I think Natan Levy is going to be better on the speed. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be able to put him away, but that cardio and that endurance is something that's going to definitely play a factor in the chin of Pete Rodriguez. So I'm going to be going with Natan Levy, but there's a lot of question marks surrounding Pete Rodriguez and his game here, potentially being able to get it done. This is a new weight class. He is a young fighter, and he is fighting out of the MMA lab. So a pretty good gym as well. Syndicate MMA for Natan Levy. So another, a strong gym there as well. I'm going with Natan Levy in this one. And then for the last fight on the prelims that I want to go into is Martin Boudier versus Jake Collier. bunch of I guess Slovak United States, but their last names have that French je ne sais quoi to them. And the reality is for Jay Collier has just not turned out to be the UFC prospect that he probably had hoped that he would be at one point. You go back and you look at some of his fights here in the UFC. He's definitely been a stalwart. His first fight coming in 2014, it was a loss to Vitor Miranda. Then he got a win. Then he got a loss. Then he got a win. Had a fight canceled. Then he got a loss to Devin Clark. Then he got a win. Then he got two fights canceled. Then he lost to Tom Aspinall pretty quickly. Then he got a win over Don Valente, which is not a great win. A loss to Carlos Felipe, which is not a great loss. A win over Chase Sherman, which is not a great win. Fight fall through with Justin Tafa. Lost to 40-something-year-old Andre Arlovsky, which doesn't look that bad, but again, it's a 40-year-old heavyweight Andre Arlovsky. I know he's been around the block, but not necessarily somebody who you want to be losing to. And then obviously taking the ground and pound loss to Chris Barnett. It's just been a slippery slope here for Jay Collier to be able to get it done and have success inside of the UFC. He doesn't have a ton of particular skills. He's not great on the ground. He is not great on the feet. He's pretty lackluster. He doesn't have a ton of power in his hands. He can, if somebody, is less experienced on the ground than him, then he can get it done. Like in this Chase Sherman fight, he can go down there and he can necessarily choke someone out. But again, that's a rear naked choke. It's not necessarily like he's getting somebody with an armbar. Back in his heyday, back in 2016, we're talking 4, 5, 7 years ago, he got a knockout via spinning kick to the body. I just don't think he's got the flexibility and the athleticism to get something like that done. And going against a guy like Martin Boudier, Boudier. Not 100% sure. I've heard it said a lot of different ways. But him coming in here, he's coming off a win over Lukas Bresky. He's got a win over Chris Barnett, which is where Chris Barnett basically just got too tired to finish, as we've seen Chris Barnett do. And that kind of goes back to the style of Jake Collier and being able to get have that loss to Chris Barnett. Lorenzo Hood, he's got some wins coming on the Contender Series and a finish there. So I think just at this point, riding high off of kind of the history that Martin Boudier had, it's not against great competition, but I think Jay Collier isn't going to be great competition either. It's near even. He's a little bit younger. He's going to be a little bit bigger, have a little bit stronger of a frame on him. It's roughly about the same size in terms of the guys, but I think Boudier is going to have a little bit more speed, a lot more athleticism, and a little bit more strength. And I think he's just as good on the feet and can handle himself on the ground up against a caliber opponent like Jay Collier. So I'm not seeing a ton of ways that Jay Collier is going to go out there and get this one done. So I'm going to put the money on Boudier, and I think he's going to get it done. I think he could probably knock out Jay Collier, and you can see the people on Tapology are agreeing with that as well. Being that he's minus 120, I don't think there's any reason to necessarily make this one sweeter because it is heavyweight and you never know what they're going to do. And the level of competition really hasn't been there for Martin either. So it's not like you're going into this and you know that he has a power and he for sure has a way that he can finish the fight. So it is a bit of a toss up, but I think there's a lot more riding on the Martin side, and that's where the pick is going to be. So with that being said, that basically sums up all of the fights that I have and all the bets that I have for the main card or the prelim card. I am going to say that I think the Trey Waters and the Josh Quinlan fight, I think that one absolutely does not go to the distance, does not go to decision. So that would be something that I would potentially look on placing a bet for. And I'm just realizing now the phantom hand in Josh Quinlan's picture. I guess you could see it now, but when the picture was a little smaller, you could see that you can't really see the arm here. You just see the phantom hand. So found that particularly interesting. So Haley Cowan making, I don't know if it's her UFC debut or just her second fight in the UFC, but highly touted prospect. A lot of people looking forward to her. It's her first actual UFC fight. And you can maybe see why a lot of people were looking forward for Haley Cowan's debut, emphasis on the looking. That being said, we will move on to the main card and get into